For more than a decade, millions of viewers have followed the mystery of Oak Island, waiting for the moment when the island finally gives up its secrets. Clue after clue has been uncovered. Tunnels have been explored. Hidden evidence beneath the surface has slowly begun to reveal pieces of a story that still refuses to make sense. But now, something may be different. What if the biggest discovery has already happened? And what if what we're about to see isn't the end of the mystery, but the moment everything changes? The History Channel's latest developments could bring investigators closer than ever to the truth behind Oak Island. But if these discoveries are pointing where they seem to be pointing, the next episode, or even the next season, could take the entire investigation in a direction no one expected. Because the question may no longer be what is buried beneath Oak Island. The real question is what happens after the truth is finally uncovered. What happens when the mystery that has kept people searching for generations can no longer remain hidden? And if what comes next reveals something the investigators never expected to find, then Oak Island may not simply be approaching an answer. It may be approaching the moment when the entire story has to be rewritten. The clue beneath the surface for years, the search on Oak Island has centered on one legendary location, the Money Pit. But the deeper researchers investigated, the stranger the story became. What seemed to be a simple underground shaft was surrounded by a series of unusual structures and possible flood systems, features that suggested someone may have deliberately designed the area to make whatever was hidden below extremely difficult to reach. And that raises a fascinating question. Why would anyone go to such extraordinary lengths to protect something? If the Money Pit was simply a forgotten treasure cache, the elaborate construction would be difficult to explain. But if it was created as a deliberate hiding place, then every tunnel, chamber, and unusual feature could have been part of a much larger plan. This is where the investigation takes a dramatic turn, because some of the evidence uncovered on Oak Island has led researchers to consider a possibility that sounds almost unbelievable. The island may have been prepared long before the famous treasure hunt even began. And if that is true, then the people who started digging here centuries ago may have been following clues left behind by someone else. Suddenly, Oak Island isn't simply a story about lost treasure. It could be the story of a carefully engineered secret, one that survived for generations because its creators knew exactly how to keep it hidden. But there's one problem. If the Money Pit was designed to protect something, then what exactly was important enough to hide so carefully? And the answer may be connected to a clue discovered somewhere no one expected, a clue that could take this investigation far beyond the island itself. The mystery beyond the island at this point, the Oak Island mystery begins to seem much bigger than a single underground chamber. For generations, investigators have uncovered clues that seem strangely out of place, artifacts, markings, structures, and geological features that have fueled theories about who may have reached the island long before modern treasure hunters ever arrived. But there is one possibility that makes the entire story even more intriguing. What if Oak Island was never intended to be the final destination? What if the island was simply one piece of a much larger puzzle? That idea changes the way researchers examine every discovery. Instead of treating each clue as an isolated mystery, investigators can start asking whether seemingly unrelated evidence might actually be connected. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because if someone deliberately chose Oak Island to hide something, they would have needed a reason to select this particular location. They would have needed knowledge of the island's terrain, its underground conditions, and perhaps even the surrounding coastline. In other words, the island itself may have been part of the secret. And if that theory is correct, then the strange structures beneath the ground may not have been built simply to conceal something. They may have been built to protect a trail that could lead investigators toward the people responsible and potentially reveal what they were trying so desperately to keep hidden. But there's another clue that makes this possibility even harder to dismiss. Because when researchers began looking beyond the famous Money Pit, they encountered evidence that appeared to point toward a completely different area of the island. And that discovery could be the key to understanding why Oak Island became the center of one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. The evidence that refuses to disappear the deeper the investigation goes, the harder it becomes to ignore the possibility that Oak Island contains something deliberately constructed. For years, skeptics have argued that many of the island's strange features could simply be the result of natural formations, old mining activity, or centuries of treasure hunters disturbing the ground. But there is a problem with that explanation. Not every clue fits. Some discoveries seem to suggest planning, organization, and an understanding of how the island's underground environment could be manipulated. And when several unusual features begin appearing during the same investigation, the possibility of coincidence becomes much harder to accept. This is exactly why the latest evidence matters so much. Instead of depending on one spectacular discovery, researchers are examining the bigger picture, comparing locations, studying old records, and trying to determine whether clues separated by time and distance could actually be connected. And if those connections are real, then the mystery may not be about finding one legendary chest of treasure at all. It could be about uncovering an entire hidden operation. Imagine that for a moment. A carefully chosen location, a deliberately engineered underground system, clues left behind for someone to discover, and a secret important enough to survive for centuries. That could explain why every time investigators believe they are getting close to an answer, another question emerges. But then comes the detail that could change everything. Because among the evidence surrounding Oak Island, there are clues that may help answer the question researchers have been asking for generations. Who could have possessed the knowledge, resources, and motivation to build something like this? And once that question is seriously examined, the Oak Island story takes an unexpected turn. One that could bring us closer to the identity of the people behind the mystery than ever before. The people behind the mystery for years, the biggest question surrounding Oak Island has been simple. What was hidden there? But perhaps investigators have been asking the wrong question. Because before we can understand what was hidden, we may first need to understand who had the ability to hide it. The engineering involved in some of Oak Island's most mysterious features has led researchers to consider the possibility that whoever created them possessed significant knowledge of construction. Water control, navigation, and underground excavation. That immediately narrows the possibilities. This was not necessarily the work of someone who simply buried an object and walked away. If the structures were deliberately designed, then the people behind them may have spent enormous amounts of time planning how the site would function and how future explorers could be prevented from reaching whatever lay below. And that creates an extraordinary possibility. Perhaps the greatest secret on Oak Island isn't a treasure chest at all. Perhaps it is the identity of the people who arrived here first. Historical records, old maps, artifacts, and archaeological clues have all contributed to theories about different groups that may have had connections to the island. Some possibilities are more plausible than others, while some remain highly controversial. But one thing is undeniable. The more pieces researchers put together, the harder it becomes to see Oak Island as an ordinary treasure hunt. And if the people behind the mystery really did leave a deliberate trail, then somewhere along that trail, there should be a clue that reveals their purpose. A signature, a symbol, a connection to another location, or perhaps something much more tangible. And this is where the investigation reaches one of its most intriguing turning points. Because the next discovery may not tell us what was buried on Oak Island. It may finally give us a reason to ask why it had to be buried there in the first place. And once that question is answered, the entire mystery could look very different. What was worth hiding? If the people behind Oak Island went to such extraordinary lengths to conceal something, then one question becomes impossible to ignore. What could possibly have been valuable enough to justify all of this? For centuries, the obvious answer has been treasure. Gold, silver, jewels, or some legendary lost fortune. And that theory is certainly what made Oak Island famous. But the more investigators examine the mystery, the more complicated that explanation becomes. A fortune can be valuable, but money alone may not explain an elaborate system designed to confuse, flood, and potentially protect a hidden location for generations. What if the real prize wasn't something that could simply be spent? What if it was something that carried historical, political, or even religious importance? That possibility opens an entirely different chapter, because throughout history, people have gone to extraordinary lengths to hide objects, documents, sacred artifacts, and evidence that could change how future generations understood the past. And if something like that was ever brought to Oak Island, then the money pit may have been designed not simply as a vault, but as a time capsule. A place where something could remain untouched until the right person eventually discovered it. That could explain one of the most frustrating aspects of the Oak Island investigation, why the clues seem to reveal just enough to keep the search alive while the final answer remains out of reach. But there is something even more intriguing. If the original builders expected someone to eventually find what they had hidden, they may have left behind a deliberate message, a way for the right investigators to recognize that they were getting close. And researchers may already have encountered pieces of that message without realizing just how important they were. Because the next clue takes us away from the tunnels, away from the money pit, and towards something that could potentially connect Oak Island to a much larger historical mystery. And if that connection is real, the treasure may be only the beginning of the story. The connection no one expected until now, the mystery of Oak Island has largely been treated as a question of what lies beneath the ground. But what if the most important clues aren't underground at all? As researchers study old maps, historical accounts, artifacts, and the island's unusual features, another possibility begins to emerge. Oak Island may have been connected to events taking place far beyond its shores. That doesn't necessarily mean there was one secret expedition or one legendary group responsible for everything. It could mean something much more subtle, a journey, a transfer of valuable objects, a carefully selected hiding place, and perhaps a trail that stretches across the Atlantic. This is where Oak Island becomes especially fascinating, because several historical theories attempt to connect the island with people and events that existed long before the modern treasure hunt began. Some of these theories remain highly disputed. Others are supported by fragments of evidence that continue to fuel debate. But the important question isn't whether every theory is correct. The important question is, why do so many different clues continue pointing investigators toward the possibility of outside connections? If someone really did bring something valuable to Oak Island, they would have needed a way to transport it, protect it, and eventually conceal it. And that means the story of Oak Island may have begun somewhere else entirely. Perhaps the island was simply the final stop in a journey whose beginning has been lost to history. And now investigators are left trying to reconstruct that journey from scattered pieces. But then comes the most intriguing possibility of all. What if one of those pieces has already been discovered, and it contains enough information to reveal where the search should go next? Because if that clue can be properly connected to the island's history, we may finally move from speculation to something far more concrete. And that is exactly where the next discovery becomes so important, because it could provide the missing link between the mystery beneath Oak Island and the people who may have brought the secret there in the first place. The mystery may be far from over after generations of searching. Oak Island has become much more than a hunt for buried treasure. It has become a puzzle built from history, speculation, archaeology, forgotten stories, and clues that have refused to disappear. And perhaps that is exactly why the mystery has survived for so long. Every time researchers seem to be getting close to an answer, another question appears. Every discovery seems to solve one part of the puzzle while opening the door to another. And that may be the most important lesson of Oak Island. The real mystery may not be whether treasure exists beneath the island. It may be understanding why someone went to such extraordinary lengths to hide something there in the first place. Was it a fortune, a collection of historical artifacts, a lost record, or something completely different? Something whose true significance has still not been understood? At this point, no single theory can answer every question surrounding Oak Island. But the search has produced something almost as valuable as a final discovery, a growing collection of evidence that continues to challenge what we thought we knew about the island. And that means the story isn't necessarily ending here. In fact, it could be entering its most important chapter yet. Because if future excavations, archaeological research, or newly discovered historical records can connect the remaining pieces, the next major breakthrough could completely reshape the story that has captivated audiences for generations. So perhaps the biggest question isn't, is the Oak Island mystery finally over? Perhaps it's this. Are we finally getting close enough to discover what the original builders never wanted the world to find? And if the next chapter delivers even one major piece of that puzzle, Oak Island could once again shock everyone watching. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't solved when the final clue is found. They're solved when we finally understand what all the clues were trying to tell us. And that is exactly why the next episode or the next season could be the most important chapter of the Oak Island story yet.